Hi, you guys. Today's video is going to cover the early modern period for three particular states in Europe. So the early modern world basically bridges the gap between the Renaissance and the modern era. So it's the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s. So the time that for Americans, where our country forms and begins is our early modern period. But of course, that time frame can apply to places all over the world, and different things are going to be happening depending on where you are in the world. So in particular, we're going to cover what's going on here in the Italian city-states, what's going on here in Central Europe in the German city-states, as well as what's happening in the Empire of Russia. So to start with, we're going to cover Germany. So it's important to note that in the early modern world, Germany has not become a country yet. It actually hasn't become a country until the 1870s. But we've been talking about the German states. We've been talking about the region that is Germany for quite a long time now. Actually, back in our second unit, we talked about the Protestant Reformation and how the Protestant Reformation began in Germany. It began with Martin Luther in 1517 in Wittenberg. And we talked about the 30 Years' War and how that was a battle of political and religious control over the region. Both of those obviously are going to have significant impacts on the development of Germany itself. The key thing to remember is that even though the title says that it's Germany, there's not a Germany, right? There's a German confederation. There's a German region. And that's what all of this is in this particular map. And each of the colors denotes a different political unit within Germany proper. And the thing they have in common is that they all speak a common language. They all speak German. There is going to be a spread of Protestantism, largely Lutheran, because of the fact that they are in Germany. But there's not going to be uniform laws. There's not going to be uniform currency because like I said earlier, each of these is independent countries, right? They're independent states. And so they're not going to have the same legal systems and they're not going to have the same monetary systems. They're not going to have the same leaders. The other thing to remember about Germany is that Germany is decimated in the 30 Years' War. It largely takes place within Germany. And if you can see by this chart, the 30 Years' War is the very beginnings of the early modern period. It lasts just shy of 30 years. And you can imagine how many people become involved in a war that takes 30 years to fight. But ultimately, it leaves about 8 million people who are dead, most of whom are not soldiers. The vast majority of people who die during the 30 Years' War are the civilians. They're the citizens of the German region. And that's just a tragedy for their culture. So there is this constant pull in the early modern period between who's going to have control over the German regions. And the two main players in the game are the Holy Roman Empire, which we've talked about a little bit before, especially with Charles V, and with this relatively new term, Prussia. So Prussia is not to be confused with Russia. Those are two very different places. Prussia is a Germanic kingdom, a German region in the German states, led by a Protestant family called the Hohenzollerns. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure I said that correctly at all. Who are very famous for, number one, pulling all the power from their nobles. Their nobles are called the Junkers, but they pulled as much power away from those nobles as they could to consolidate power. You'll notice that this is still a very absolutist time period. We are on the heels of the English Civil War. We are on the heels of the French Revolution, rather, but remember that the English Civil War still resulted in a monarchy, a constitutional one, but a monarchy just the same. And the French Revolution led to massive chaos and a dictator that takes over the world, or tries to take over the world. And so the concepts of absolutism and maintaining control are going to be very important in this time period. The Holy Roman Empire, the Prussians are also led by an extremely militaristic family. The culture is very militaristic. It's super harsh. Frederick the Great, the man who becomes Frederick the Great, his father, Frederick William, was the leader of Prussia, the King of Prussia. And Frederick was very into the arts and music and culture. And his dad found that was completely irrational, completely unacceptable for a heir to the Prussian throne. And so he put him in solitary confinement. And it was discovered that a friend of Frederick's was basically helping him during solitary confinement. So one of the things that happens is that friend is arrested. These are teenagers. This friend is arrested, and Frederick the Great is forced by his dad to watch the beheading of his friend. And his friend's only crime was to help him. So it's very harsh. It's very intense. Their counterparts, their enemies, are the Catholic Habsburgs, which we've talked about before, who are still struggling to maintain power in their region. Maria Theresa is the queen of the Habsburgs at one point, and one thing that she did is she introduced tax reform, which is a really key benefit to her culture. But what she did is she started taxing the rich. Remember that was an issue in the French Revolution, is that during the French Revolution, they were not paying any taxes as nobles, and that was one of the causes of the French Revolution. Well, Maria Theresa is ahead of the French Revolution, and she implemented tax reform and made her nobles start paying taxes in order to reduce their power. A fun fact about Maria Theresa, this is Maria Theresa, this is Frederick the Great. Maria Theresa is the mom of Marie Antoinette. So Marie Antoinette, who ultimately loses her head in the French Revolution, her mom was, because she passes away in the 1780s, was the queen of the Habsburg Empire. Maria Theresa has 16 children, 13 of whom live to adulthood. So she is the founding mother of a lot of the royal families in Europe at the time. All right, moving on to Italy. Italy is super strange. So Italy is just like the German states, Italy doesn't become a country until the 1870s either. But Italy is mostly controlled by foreign powers. They're controlled by Spain for a while. They're controlled by Austria for a while. They're also going to be controlled and partnered with France during the Napoleonic era. And all of that helps shape their culture. They are all going to continue to speak Italian, but it's very strange depending on who's in control and what region of the country you live in. It's going to change how your culture develops. They do still have classical civilizations. Remember, we're talking about Greco-Roman culture here. So Italy still is seen as like the heart and the soul of Europe, culturally, artistically, musically, but it's still not its own country, and almost all the time it's being controlled in the early modern period by people from other countries. And then the last one is Russia, and Russia is its own being. So if you can see from this map, I wonder if I can make it a little bit bigger for you guys. Russia is super ethnically diverse. I mean, of course, it has a lot of Russians who are ethnically one language and they're largely Russian Orthodox religion, but also, also they are all these various other, like each of these colors represents another major ethnic group in Russia. So the Russians are a super diverse culture. Some Russians are more closely related to the Japanese or the Koreans or the Chinese than they are to the Europeans because of how vast the region is. So that also is going to cause a lot of problems with Russia. One person that you need to know for Russia is Ivan the Terrible. And Ivan is the first Tsar of Russia. They take that word Tsar, which really just means king, from the Roman word for Caesar. So Ivan is the first Tsar of Russia, and he reorganizes the government. He's trying to centralize their power. Remember, that's our theme, right? Total power in the hands of one person. He also restructures the Orthodox Church. So he he tasks some of his advisors with restructuring the church, putting in some rules and regulations for the church, and canonizing, putting a lot of famous Russian people as saints. So he builds up the importance of the Russian Christian church. And he also, again, you'll notice a theme, is going to limit the power of the nobles. They're called boyars in Russia, right? They were Junkers in Germany. They are boyars. That's an A, by the way, Boyars in Russia. And he limits their power. He's called Ivan the Terrible because he likely suffered from mental illness. There's lots of reasons to believe that. Number one, he beat his son to death with a stick based on a disagreement. He also ordered the execution of thousands of people in a town because he thought the entire town was plotting against him. It is also rumored that after he had St. Basil's Cathedral built, he ordered the architects to be blinded so that they would never again build something so beautiful for anyone else in the rest of time. So he's a pretty harsh ruler, hence the name Ivan the Terrible. We've already talked a little bit about Peter the Great, so just a reminder that he is increasing the power of the king. He also does expand serfdom. He expands the peasant system. We talk a lot about how Peter the Great brought Russia into the modern world for Europe, but also I want you to understand that he is responsible for the laws that meant that peasants were never allowed to leave where they were born, much like slaves, only they weren't technically owned and they were paid. There was a palace guard revolt, and he, after squashing that revolt, had over 1,000 palace guards tortured, executed, and then he left their bodies to rot for months as a warning as to what happens to people who revolt against the king. So again, Russia's super intense, right? Super harsh. But he also is responsible for building up their infrastructure and their manufacturing industries and opening up Russia to trade with the other powerful countries in Europe. Catherine the Great is the last one we're going to talk about. So she is a German princess who is married to the man who ultimately becomes a Russian Tsar. And her husband is murdered. And there are people who believe that he was murdered at the request of Catherine the Great because he was not a great person either. But that's really just a rumor. We don't have a lot of historical background for that. She continues the westernization movements of Peter the Great. There is a czar in between their rule. She expands education, not just for boys, but also for girls in Russia. She is a big fan of the arts. She brings a lot of that German culture back with her, and implements funding for the arts. But it's also important to note that she is responsible for harshly squashing peasant revolts. The peasants are obviously angry that they don't have any rights in Russia, just like they were angry that they didn't have any rights in France. And where the French Revolution led to a revolution that led to a new government, led to multiple other new governments, she uses her military and the power that she has to squash those peasant revolts. And a lot of peasants are killed as a result. So Russia is kind of the theme of Russia is they are maintaining that autocratic, totalitarian, absolutist rule. Oops, sorry, I meant the pen there. But all the monarchs are going to be the ones in charge. The monarchs are the only person in charge. There's no constitutional systems here. So I'm just going to write that. Total power in the hands of the monarchs, in the hands of the czars, also in the hands of the Prussian kings, also in the hands of whoever's controlling Italy at the time. That's the theme here. So no Enlightenment philosophers here. All right. If you have any questions, as always, let me know. See you guys next time.